I mean, I always sort of remind people of the story of of the emperor with no clothes. I mean, who was the person who actually figured out that the emperor had no clothes? It was a young person. It was a kid who sort of was able to see through all of that. So I think that we underestimate the power of youth agency, right?
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Bloem, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest, who will ask to introduce himself. Amjad, please go ahead.
Hi, Maurice. Thank you for having me. My name is Amjad Saleem. I am a peacebuilding practitioner, come development humanitarian pracademic. So I straddle the practitioner academic landscape. Been working in the field for the last 20 years, and also with a very particular interest in interfaith and youth engagement.
Okay. And Amjad, where are you based at the moment?
So currently, I'm in Colombo,
Mhm.
Sri Lanka, and I am here. Been here for the last one month or so.
Okay.
After having lived in Geneva for the last 9 years. So I think I know that one of the questions that had been asked is what was the monumental thing that happened in 2026, and that. So this is the monumental thing that from your previous guest
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I took the decision to move the family back. After 9 years of living in Geneva, back to or to not back to Sri Lanka. My parents are Sri Lankan. I'm dual
Mhm.
nationality, but I've I my mom is here, so I wanted to
Mhm.
come and spend some time with her and my in-laws and everything else, and also introduce my son to a culture and heritage that he doesn't really know. So that was
Okay.
part of the journey that I'm on.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you have dual citizenship, but where were you born and raised?
So I am what they call a third culture kid. So
Mm-hmm.
I was born in Nigeria. I lived there for years, and I grew up in Ethiopia, and then spent the rest of my life in the UK. So I'm extremely confused actually as to
Yeah.
where I am from. So if you ask me in terms of nationality, I'm British Sri Lankan.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask me in terms of where home has been anywhere and everywhere. So, I feel at home, and I consider myself, having been blessed to have been brought up in Nigeria, a very rich culture and heritage, having grown up in Ethiopia, equally uh, old heritage and
Mm-hmm.
traditions and everything else. And then, of course, the multiculturalism of the UK. So I think I consider myself a bit of everything. And if you look at some of my social handles, I proudly have fly the flags of all the countries that that I'm there. So I wouldn't want to say that I wouldn't put myself in one
Box.
pot or another.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would I would sort of say I'm from those places, and that has helped me as well shape my outlook on life. Let me
Mm.
put it that way.
Yeah. And interesting in terms of, you know, you mentioned yourself in terms of home. That's difficult to define where that is. My children also traveled a lot around because we took them around because, as the listeners know, I'm originally from the Netherlands, although I'm mixed. We lived for 7 years in Bangladesh, 10 years in Indonesia, and then now in the States. But they said, and it will change, of course, as soon as they have their own families, but they always say home is where you guys are. So if we are in a hotel, that's home. If we are in a house somewhere, that's where their home is. So it would be interesting to see how your children would look at that, and especially now after you brought them to Sri Lanka. Can you uh, tell a bit then about your upbringing. You know, I understand that you moved around, but yeah, how was it in terms of, you know, sports, plays, friends that you had, siblings, all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, so I guess being a third culture kid, and I mean, my father worked for the World Bank, so you know, I'm part of that sort of generation of kids who've sort of grown up in that multinational, lateral world. So you know, it was in one sense extremely privileged because you were in an expat bubble, but you also got to, because of school, got to meet friends from different countries. So for me, I'm extremely proud of the fact that you know, I have friends that stretch as far as sort of, you know, Fiji all the way then across to the US and um and Canada and everything else. So I have friends that I've really on all parts of the world, which um, makes very good sort of networks and contacts. It's slightly different to how perhaps schooling and everything is brought up, say in the UK or in Sri Lanka, where you know you very much you form your social networks based on the school that you went to, and that sort of leads you through life because you've been at the same school. And obviously I haven't. I've sort of moved around, and so I have a wider I have a wider cast of friends than say some of the people who've been born and brought up here in Sri Lanka, but maybe it's not as deep as they would have, but
Mm,
I still consider them my friends. But I think from my perspective, I was extremely fortunate and privileged to grow up in Nigeria, which you know, in the 80s, you know, was going through a number of challenges, particularly the Muslim Christian kind of this thing. But, you know, just really understanding the warmth of a country and the people. And then in Ethiopia, which has a very proud Orthodox Christian heritage, but also very strong link with Islam. And, you know, just, and a country that was not necessarily colonized as well, right? So
mm,
very proud of that anti-colonial kind of heritage, and so it was great to kind of grow up in that space. And really, I think um, that was my first schooling into understanding and appreciating different cultures and appreciating diversity in its entirety and learning to respect and understand people coming from other religions. So I
mhm,
had friends who were Orthodox, I had friends who were Jewish, I had friends who were Christian, Muslim, Shia, Sunni, Hindu. So you know, I had a wide variety of friends there, and you know, it was easy or you know, it was easy to sort of be together
mm,
as kids, but also recognize different people's cultures and food and everything else, and then learn to appreciate that. And that really helped me later on when I moved back to the UK from Ethiopia, and then I went to school back in the UK, and you know, it had really helped me understand, and then of course in my work, because then I bring that learning with me. I bring an appreciation of needing to understand different cultures there. Also, it made me appreciate my own heritage, right? So
mm,
I although you know my parents are Sri Lankan and are British and I'm British, but I never I never grew up in Sri Lanka. I was never born in Sri Lanka and everything else. But growing up, I would often find that I was one of the very few Sri Lankans in or Sri Lankan heritage in the places where I was. And then people would then sort of want to find out more. Oh, you're Sri Lankan. Where is that? Where is Sri Lanka? You're not Indian. You look
mm,
Indian. No, I'm not. I'm not Indian. I'm Sri Lankan. Okay, then you have to explain, right? Where Sri Lanka is, or where it is in terms of its geography. And then for those people who sort of knew about Sri Lanka or had heard about Sri Lanka, um, they didn't really know that there was a Muslim community there,
mm,
right? So then you would have to then kind of explain to them that you're not Buddhist or you're not Hindu, you're not Sinhalese or Tamil, you're Muslim. Oh, we didn't realize there was a Muslim community there. Or what is that about? So it helped me as well understand and frame where my heritage was, because I had to explain that to others.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and then that sets a process of, you know, if you wish, if you seek first, if you know, seek first to, if you want to understand, seek first to be understood, right? I mean, that you have to kind of uh, create that space for that type of conversation.
Yeah. And you know, the fact that you were exposed to so many different faiths, um, and you know, you are interested in it as well. Is that because your, you know, faith is important for yourself, or was that not the case when you're younger, or maybe even now?
No, it was it was it's been an important part of my journey,
Mm-hmm.
my spirituality and my relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, being born and brought up a Muslim, but just having that appreciation of that connection and with God has been very useful for me. I mean, I went to boarding school when I was 16, and uh, I think that's where I found my closest connection with, because that was what sort of gave me the strength to kind of go through boarding school and give me that strength to kind of come out of it there. And it's also something that I think my father taught me, you know, very to sort of that, never to be shy of your faith, but also never to underestimate the power of spirituality. He was a great believer in spirituality, so he never sort of thought about interfaith dialogue, right? He sort of said, oh, interfaith dialogue really doesn't, he goes, it takes you only a certain place. But he said, you need to have solidarity. And actually where that comes through is recognizing spirituality as a goal. So if you really have that shared understanding of where you are, the divine and the purpose, I think that's more important. And that's where you can start to move the conversation forward. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I learned that aspect of spirituality and aspect of inter-community, inter-religious dialogue from him. You know, he always had the great belief that faith leaders had the special role to play in being moral compasses of society, and that was that was irrespective of the fact that we're from a particular faith or not. He was like, they have to be the beacon of how we would move society forward. Um, so I kind of got that from there, but a lot of that also is based on you know, just understanding and being exposed to the different faith communities that I was. I think Ethiopia was particularly interesting with the Orthodox Christian kind of practices there, because a lot of what they say and something, a lot of it is, there's some similarities with Islam. So it was very interesting, you know, when I was about 11 or 12, just to kind of understand that, hang on, there's another faith there that is very similar to what we were, to what we're doing, and they have their own beliefs and practices, and very strong in that faith as well. So yeah, so I would sort of say that it's something that has guided me and that's
Mm-hmm.
strengthened me. And obviously, like with anything, there are peaks and troughs in spirituality, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the key thing is that you just keep on um, having the hope that, and again, we would come back to this thing of hope, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, is just how do you keep yourself going? And that is understanding like the divine plan, and understanding what your purpose is, and seeing that reflected in relationships
Mm-hmm.
with people.
No, I think thanks for sharing that, Amjad. I would like to go back to the comment that you made in terms of that your father was an inspiration there, motivated you to go in that direction. And then you said, and that further developed when you were going to boarding school. I assume that was in the UK, or am I
Yeah.
wrong? Okay. But your father was working for the World Bank. So
Yes.
that you know, if I think about the World Bank, and most people maybe they don't necessarily think that's a faith-based, you know, an entity where faith plays a big role, right? So
Yeah.
how did he use that? And then how?
I think, I mean, it's a very interesting question. So when I look back, I don't know how much of it he used in his work, but obviously
Mm-hmm.
it guided him in his principles and his
Sure.
ethics,
Okay.
right? So I remember that very, very vividly, right? I
Mm-hmm.
remember that extremely vividly in terms of his ethics and his principles. Even, you know, even things as simple as, for example, um, I remember there were often times that, when you the organization that he worked for, you could you when you were fly we were in Ethiopia, so when he used to fly to places, they would offer him, okay, we can fly you business class, and he would be like, I, I don't need to. I'm perfectly okay flying flying economy. The money that would be saved, that's where we should go. So, I mean, I didn't see it. It wasn't necessarily something that drove his work, although I know from sort of speaking, particularly after he passed away, his ex-colleagues would tell me how principled he was, right? That he was a man of principle and ethics, and he would stand up for that. But I did see it. I would sort of say, I mean, he had. I remember my father in two parts. So one is obviously when he was working with the World Bank and everything else, and then the second part was when he retired, and then he retired and came back to Sri Lanka. And he said, "Oh, I'm not going to settle in the UK. I'm going to come back to Sri Lanka. I'm going to survive. I'm going to settle here, and I want to kind of contribute." Um, and one of the things that he did when he came here was that he also became very engaged in interfaith work and became the president of the Mahatma Gandhi Center in Sri Lanka. And so this aspect of spirituality and nonviolence was something that he really preached. And and so again, I saw that perspective of him. So I think I learned that from him. And the other thing, of course, that uh, I also learned, and this was something that now I look back and I have so much appreciation and thank and gratitude to him for, is the fact that whenever whenever he used to have a lot of conversations with his friends, intellectual conversations of religion and politics and everything else, and um, he never prevented me from sitting in on those conversations. Even when I was a young kid, he would never sort of, "Oh, you're a kid, don't be here." I would He would always have me around. So I grew up sort of seeing some of these intellectual people kind of absorbing like a sponge some of these things that were being said, and kind of discussions and everything else. So I think that was his way of sort of teaching me as well. So not sort of encouraging, and that then encouraged. And then he was a great reader. So I developed a love for books based on the fact that he just had books everywhere, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he would buy books, and he would read, and he would give me. So I remember that even at a very 13, 14, he was giving me books on philosophy and politics and everything else, and encouraging me just to read and widen my understanding. So I think that is something that has helped me sort of help me to kind of channel that and move forward in understanding that the diversity and the beauty of the diversity of the world.
Yeah. No, thanks. And he sounds really as a remarkable man. And also, in terms of my comment about the World Bank, it's not totally fair, of course. Because,
Yeah.
I'm working, all of you working for the World Bank and is working closely with JLI, we know that the World Bank is also very much part of, faith-based related discussions. So I need to take part of that wonderment back. Um, I'm going to tell a bit about then that step that you had to go on when you were 16 years old. You go to a boarding school. Yeah, how was that? Tough?
Yeah, it
Or
it was tough. It was quite tough, right? I mean, it
hmm
was first time there, and it was in Kent. It was Seven Oaks School, which was I think one of the good private schools in the UK, and I was privileged again. I've been so grateful, and it's with God's grace, and obviously then with my father's kind of thing, that I was privileged to have these opportunities to go to these places and learn and interact. So I went there, and initially when I went, I was extremely nervous, and I remember this vividly. And I think the first thing that I remember um, telling my mom before I went was like, I'm not sure how I'm going to fast. So we're currently in the month of Ramadan, right?
hmm
And
hmm
so my first thing was, how am I going to? I don't think I'm going to fast because it's a boarding school. how are they gonna how are they going to sort of cater for that? And am I going to get halal food? And am I just going to be having vegetarian food the whole of the kind of whole of the semester and everything else? And then I remember when we went there, and the first thing that when we were sort of doing the onboarding and sort of my first day in, and the matron at my boarding house, immediately she looked at my name and she goes, "Oh, are you Muslim?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, if you want, we do have a provision for kosher food. We can't get halal food because there's not many Muslims, but we can get kosher food." And my dad said, "Yeah, absolutely. If he could get kosher food, then that's fine. We would like to have kosher food." And then they said if he wants to fast as well, we're happy to make those provisions for fasting. So he can fast. He just has to pick up his meals and everything else. And I found that extremely heartening, right? That here
Mm.
I was one of very few Muslims in the boarding house, but they really went out of the way to actually make sure that we weren't excluded. And I think that for me stayed with me, and that's been something that I'm extremely proud of in the UK. Although it's being challenged now, but there is an aspect of inclusiveness and welcoming
Mm.
in within the UK that has been there for a while, and that we would open up and we would respect, and we will be inclusive, and we will try and ensure that you don't feel left out, because that being British is part of is that. And so that was extremely that was extremely welcoming for me. And then actually we obviously had a chaplain in school, and he would he would allow me to go and pray in the chapel in school, during school time when I
Mm.
had to pray. And then ended up sort of arranging special visit. I mean, here again, he would arrange a special visit for me to go and visit the mosque in London and things like that. And he would have so it was quite interesting how that helped me. And I think again that helped me go through another journey of understanding, of interfaith understanding as well, of how do we create spaces of respect, that we may not agree on this, but we respect you enough to kind of give you a space to practice in a way that you feel adheres to your faith. And that was extremely
Mm.
special to me, because that helped me then really get an understanding of that space. And so I think if it wasn't for that chaplain at um at the school, I think
Uh-huh.
I would have gone probably a different way, and not been able to come out with this very I don't want to say strong identity, but a centered identity about being a Muslim, but also understanding sort of the the richness of being part of a community.
I think you are extremely active in the interfaith world, um, and I would like to talk about your peace building and humanitarian leadership as well. But after this boarding school, somehow you ended up going for engineering and business, right? So, yeah, take us through that. How did that happen?
Well, it's the late '90s, and you come from a South Asian family, and you can either be one of three things, right? You can be a doctor, or you can be a lawyer, or you can be an engineer. I've my mom's family are all lawyers, and so I think from her perspective, she was like, "Oh, we need to kind of diversify the talent pool." I think secretly my father wanted me to be a doctor, so I ended up sort of trying to sort of think about medicine. And then I had one session with my career advisor, and he said, "Nope, I don't think you're going to be a good doctor. Um, this isn't school." He's like, "I think you're too empathetic, and so I think you will end up you'll end up feeling the pain of your patients, and that's not good to be like a doctor. So he said, then he said, well, the only thing I can suggest is, you're good at maths, and in those days, things like international development and international relations, and those were not really on the cards. Or so I ended up doing civil engineering because when I was discussing again with my parents and my dad in particular, he was like, if you really want to go back and serve communities, probably the best one to do is civil engineering, because at least you can go back and you can build, um, build construct roads and everything else, and you can help in the development of a country and everything else. So that's what I did. So I went and I did engineering at Imperial, and I graduated, and I worked for about 4 years in engineering. Obviously, on the side, I was kind of doing for volunteering and interfaith stuff, but I was really working as an engineer. Um, but then, as in life, it the tsunami struck in 2004,
Mm.
and things changed. Sri Lanka was one of the countries next to Indonesia, was one of the countries that was hit worst. The eastern part of Sri Lanka, where my parents come from,
Mhm.
was one of the worst hit. And then the village where my mom comes from was one of the worst hit. So
Yeah.
we lost about 5 members of our family,
Yeah.
and my grandmother barely survived there. And so, in 2005, basically after volunteering for a couple of months, tsunami, I came back to my job, and then I just took a sabbatical, and went and joined Muslim Aid, which is a British NGO. Went and joined them to do some house building programs for in post tsunami, Sri Lanka in the eastern part. So again, using my engineering skills and to to build houses. Interesting enough, we ended up working in the eastern part, and we were working with a community that had been affected by the conflict, uh, sort of a couple of years before, in the 90s, early 2000s, had been displaced to the coastal part of the region, and with the tsunami, had once again been displaced back
Yeah.
to their land. So these are communities that actually had two displacements,
Yeah.
and so they were now back in the original place where they'd been displaced from due to the conflict, because we had a peace agreement in Sri Lanka for 2 years when the tsunami struck. And so we decided to, and this was a mixed community. This was a Tamil Hindu community and a Muslim community. So we decided to build houses the for those displaced. And in our sort of enthusiasm and wisdom at that time, we thought, oh, wouldn't it be great that we could also use this as a way of bringing communities together? And so let's build a peace village, and we will have one village, and the Muslims and Tamils will live next door to each other, and they'll be happy, and we've brought peace and everything else. And so we built the houses, and um, these were communities that had previously lived in wooden shacks on the beach, and now they had really concrete houses and
Mhm.
everything else. And they came in and they sort of looked around. They said, "Oh, brilliant! We've never had anything like this." That's just one problem. Uh, we can't live next door to each other. We can live village to village, but house to house is not going to work. And that was an eye opener for me. So that was the first time that I was thinking, oh my God, we should have consulted them a little bit better to really ask, the whole concept of localization and community engagement in those days wasn't really there, right? So we should consult them. But what struck me as well was that this was a community that had suffered from the conflict, that suffered from the tsunami. They had sort of seen everything been destroyed, yet they were still not able to see beyond their sort of racial or religious boundaries, and so they were still not able to live next door to each other. So it was quite interesting that I found myself thinking, well, I've built the houses, but to put people in the houses is another bit of work that needs to be done. So it was almost like the hardware is there, but if you don't have the proper software, the system doesn't work. And I think that's what's kind of kept me going. Okay, that even when it comes to interfaith work or whatever, if you do not invest in the software, encouraging people to understand and get to know each other, then you have a problem, and the hardware fails. And so, to sort of finish that story, we ended up purchasing land next to the land that we had built for this house. We bought land. We built another set of houses for the Tamil community, and then what we did is we put a couple of community centers in between the two villages. So at least they would come and they would use and they would try and interact with the sort of community wells, and that to at least have some sense of interaction
Hmm.
there, because that was the only way we could try and encourage them to have a, a conversation, to get to know each other.
Okay. Very interesting story, and yeah, there's a lot of similarities. Because I was in Indonesia when the organization I worked for at that time also responded to the tsunami. So we have similar stories and experiences there. But I would like to make it a little jump. I mean, just to um, you know, you have worked with organizations like IFRC, International Alert, the Commonwealth Foundation, Muslim Aid, and you're also teaching humanitarian leadership. I think if I listen to you, that the turning point from engineering, civil engineer, to peace building and humanitarian leadership, that happened because of the tsunami in 2004, right? And then now your work focuses on interfaith engagement, inclusion, conflict resolution. So my question for you is, in today's world where polarization seems to be growing, what role do you see for faith communities and interfaith collaboration in building a more peaceful societies? And you were going there slowly, but yeah.
Yeah. um I think that so there's a couple of things there, right? So I think the first one is that I think currently there's a deep crisis of trust, right? There's a
Yeah.
deep crisis of trust between people, between communities, between institutions. Um, Obviously, between faiths as well and within faiths as well. Um, I think that from my perspective, I really see faith institutions, faith leaders as catalysts of conversations, um, to help to recognize the the divine in each other, right? So God says in the Quran that I've created you in different tribes so that you may know each other. And so I think that part of our responsibility as faith representatives, faith leaders, is to create those spaces whereby we can come together on the on our shared values, of of peace, justice, compassion, things that we hold, and particularly amongst the Abrahamic faith, which, I mean, sadly, the current context, it's not happening. But there is something that unites us all, um, to be able to at least create a conversation, uh, to create a space for a conversation as well. Because I think it's not even to have that we don't have spaces for those types of conversations where we can really get to know and understand each other, and to recognize that we share certain similarities and certain values, in terms of kindness, compassion, family, whatever that you want to kind of describe it. We share that. It's not something that's unique just to one faith or another. Um, and there's a strength in that. And I think this is where the conversation is. I think we spend a lot of time seeking numbers and members for our little congregations without actually understanding that the connections are transversal. They're not just vertical. They're also horizontal. And I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of space there. The other thing I think as well is that there is, particularly I've been working with young people, um, over the last sort of 9 years, more, but particularly in 9 years, um, there is a lot of mistrust around traditional institutions because they see. I often sort of say there's a disconnect between the audio and the video, right? So what 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 they hear people say and what they see people do is completely different. So there's a lot of mistrust there, but that doesn't mean young people are not spiritual or religious, or that doesn't mean people are, but they have different ways in which they express that. They have different way questions they have about purpose and ethics. They express their values through social action or anything else, and a lot of them are seeking some sort of grounding in a chaotic world. They're seeking that type of meaning, and I think there's a responsibility on us to create a space to prov- to help people reach that tranquility or stillness of the heart that allows them to kind of seek the next phase of life, the purpose of life. And I think this is where faith leaders of faith communities need to be. Um, I think the purpose or the 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 ways of worship. I think we spend more time on that rather than actual understanding the purpose of worship and everything else, right? And I think it's something there that we need to kind of think about in how we connect our lives and how we treat one another. That's where I think
Hmm.
there's an opportunity for faith leaders to work.
Can I um, piggyback a bit on what you said in terms of the younger generation? Um, so what trends do you then see among young people today when it comes to religion, spirituality, and identity? And I think when I listen to you, you know, you still think that faith can become not a source of division but of renewal, uh, perhaps even new forms of community and meaning, right?
Yes.
So yeah, can you share what do you see what type of trends do you see for among these younger generation?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's definitely a concept of what I would call spiritual curiosity without an institutional attachment, right? I mean, I think that there are young people they have profound questions about purpose and ethics and all of those things. But often these questions, there's no space within traditional structures to have a conversation on this, right? Um, and nor do they sort of see that the encouragement of those kind of purpose and ethics. So I think that that's one that there's definitely. So it's wrong to kind of think about the younger generation not being religious or whatever. I think it's that there's a spiritual curiosity there. I think that but what I see a lot of young people now wanting to be is expressing sort of maybe those spiritual values through action, through social action, climate justice, human dignity, equality, equity. I mean, I've been amazed, particularly the last few years, at how young people are stepping up and doing things. And when I was working for the IFRC, we 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 ran a project alongside with the big six youth organizations. So the big six youth organizations are the World YMCA, the World YWCA, the Scouts, the Girl Guides, IFRC, and the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. We had a project called the Global Youth Mobilization, and the idea was very simple: that if you have an idea as a young person to solve a problem in your community, um, you could you could submit your idea to us, and we would fund you for anywhere between 500 euros to about 5,000 euros, and you could test your idea to 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 fruition. Over the last 2 years that we've run the program, we've received 20,000 applications from across the world, right? So young people are thirsty. They have ideas. They have ideas on what they can do to solve problems in their communities. And the challenge that we have is that we really don't give them the space for that. I mean, I often talk about the 5 A's of youth engagement. I sort of say young people are agents of change. They will take the change. We've seen that. We've seen that over the last few years in Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. You know, they're anchors. They're anchors in communities. They start from community. They come from the communities. They're advocates. They will they will sort of speak out. They will amplify those voices, and they will design their own solutions. They have those ideas. This is that no one really pays attention to them, right? I mean, I always sort of remind people of the story of of the emperor with no clothes. I mean, who was the person who actually figured out that the emperor had no clothes? It was a young person. It was a kid who sort of was able to see through all of that. So I think that we underestimate the power of
Mm.
youth agency, right? Um, and so and we I think it's important. And throughout our religious histories, the prophetic traditions have always been come through young men or young women, but young men in particular. The prophets were all young. You look at Joseph and this thing. They were all young men who kind of came up with brilliant ideas of how they could change societies. I think that that there is that aspect of that, and I think that so this is where I would sort of say we need to that's the trend from my perspective. And I think I do see faith as I mean, many people see faith as a source of division, and yes, I mean, there's
Yeah.
enough evidence of that, particularly currently. But equally, with like they say, with every problem, there's an opportunity. So with every division, there's an opportunity to build bridges, and faith. We do that because ultimately, for millions of people across the world, faith is a lived experience of that them.
Mm-hmm.
This is day in day out. So if we cannot align with their lived experience and bring faith into it, I think we're doing them a disservice, because actually faith does talk about compassion. It does talk about kindness. It does talk about you know um, treating, getting to know each other, treating each other with kindness and love and respect, and all of those things. And I think it's important for us to we have those values, the values that we talk about in terms of compassion, kindness, all of charity, service. All of those things are not unique to anyone.
Sure.
They're across the board. So I think that if we need to be able to identify those and help to kind of move the conversation forward, because ultimately, we all have. I mean, I think uh, Kwame Anthony Appiah, who sort of he's a great sort of scholar. So talks about each of us. We have, are the sort of identity of all of us is based on a broken mirror, and we all have parts of that identity. And so we need to be able to kind of bring all of that together to kind of create this mosaic of the shared humanity. And I think we need to do that. And unfortunately, it's been sort of abused. It's been taken over for power and for greed and for other things. And I think we need to be able we have to take back that narrative as well.
Hmm. So you recently contributed to the International Journal of Peace and Justice, right?
Yeah. And yeah, so the article was sort of, we were talking about post exploring post normal peace. And I it was about the role of hope in an ever divided world. And
Mm-hmm.
again, my kind of intervention. So first, it was actually an article that was done uh with two others.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, we called it a polylogue. So what we decided to do was kind of write in a way that each of us would kind of bring our own thoughts to us. Three of us kind of put our own thoughts together, and we crafted this paper out. So it was quite an interesting kind of format. But I think the gist of what I was kind of thinking about was the fact that we have a peace flux at the moment, right? So there's what we call a transitional peacefulness that is there. And this flux it's reflecting a much more global, broader condition of fragility. And so this is then affecting we have a crisis of trust. We have a crisis of lack of hope. And so what we need to do is we need to understand how do we intersect, how do these risks intersect, and how do we build opportunities for trust. And so I talk about, number one, the concept of radical hope.
Hmm.
And radical hope is sort of uh, not not naive optimism, but a belief in a future goodness that transcends the current horizon of understanding. And I know that sounds a bit listening, but I think it's really sort of saying that we need to have the courage to imagine and build a future even when the path forward is uncertain. And that sort of hope has to be there. And that hope is fed, obviously there's a spiritual dimension to that. So you have the stories from the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or wherever that give you those stories of that type of hope. But you need to be able to kind of draw on that to then take you to developing that ethical resilience and openness to the emergence of new ways. And that's important, that it gives you that opportunity to be open. And then the second part of it was really talking about youth engagement and sort of really
Hmm.
understanding that young people have, they have that courage. They're showing that courage. They're, Fridays for the Future or all of those young people who are on the streets protesting, they're having that courage, and they're sort of saying, we don't want a future that we don't want to inherit a future where the earth is burning or we're at war. We want something different, and I think that's important. And then the third element of it is really talking about the role of non-formal education. And again, this is where I think that there's a nice crossover with faith institutions. And because I'm also a great believer in sort of the story of non-formal education and values education. And Jack Ma, who's the founder of Alibaba, from the Amazon equivalent in China, in 2018 in Davos at the World Economic Forum, he was asked, what is the future of education? And this was in 2018, and he sort of said, well, to be honest, most of the stuff is going to be automated. So whatever we've learned, and we're not actually, we're actually teaching kids, or we're preparing kids for jobs that will not exist in years' time, and we don't even know what jobs will exist in the years to come, because they would have gone. But he said the most of the stuff that we're teaching in schools actually is also going to be automated. So you can learn maths, you can learn science and everything else. You can learn it online. AI will come. My son is homeschooled. Um, Everything is there. He said the only thing that you will not be able to automate is values. You will not be able to automate that, and you will not be able to teach how to interact with each other, how to learn nonviolent, all of those things. Um, and I think in that, I think there's a huge space for how faith institutions, faith leaders should really chart a way forward in terms of giving people those life skills to be able to treat each other with respect, to with understand human dignity, um, non-violent communities, all of those things that are important to help them navigate and foster an agency and develop their styles and everything else. I think this is what is important now for for young people. And so this is what, obviously, I've been working. The big six organizations, and like I talked about previously, they all were champions of non-formal education and volunteering, because again, you can't just give people the skills. You need to allow them to channel that into something. Otherwise, they get very frustrated. The young people get very frustrated. So it has to be volunteering as well. You have to allow them to channel those spiritual values into social action
Mm.
and to do things on the ground. And these organizations are great at that. So again, I think that there's a space there for faith institutions to play in addressing that, not because we want to get more members to our congregation, 'cause I think that's the wrong approach. But if we can teach people to be better human beings, and to actually go down the street, I think that's important. And again, this is where I talked a little bit about the hardware versus the software. And I think that faith institutions are the hardware, but we need to also look at the software.
Okay. And I really encourage the listeners to check out your article. I'll make sure that I put a link in the podcast notes. Um, I've you also, when I was looking at your publications and books you've written, one struck my attention, and that is the lessons from Aceh. And that is because, as I told you, I also worked as part of a tsunami response. Um, my question, and I think what your book is highlighting is many lessons. The fact that the international community often overlooks uh, issues when working in fragile or conflict-affected societies, right? Not paying attention to local customs, cultures, etc. Um, so, but my question to you, though, and so I really encourage people to check out your book. My question, though, for you is, um, if you were writing the lessons from Aceh today, with the knowledge that you have at the moment, since then, um, yeah, would you have written certain parts of the book differently?
That's that's a very interesting question. So the lessons from Aceh were written primarily. Actually, the context for that was because in 2006 the conflict restarted in Sri Lanka, right? And
Hmm.
so we had this conference in 2007 in where actually I was working with Muslim Aid and with the Methodist Church, and this thing, we had a conference where we wanted to bring the lessons of Aceh again. In those days, we didn't talk about radical hope, but it was kind of creating a space for hope. This is possible. And the lessons from Aceh were really an opportunity to help people to understand. Here was also a similar context. You had a really decades long conflict there. And, out of the tsunami disaster, there emerged an opportunity for peace. Now, obviously, one can argue where this has gone, but at that time, there was a real sense of then. And the question for us is, if that happened then, why couldn't it happen in Sri Lanka? Um, so I think that I don't know whether I would rewrite. I mean, I would probably not. I would probably focus a lot more on the idea of interest versus principle, and I think that there was a nice turning point. And again, it's not. You know, you often think about this as something set, and I think what I've come to realize over the last few years is that it's divine. It's a divine kind of connection, but it's a momentary. It's something. There's an opportunity. It's not been designed. Um, it's not designed, and you can't sort of think about it. It's you there's not. It's so when you teach. Sometimes when I sort of teach sort of students who are listening, I often tell them, look, what I'm teaching in theory. To be honest, when you go out on the field, it's a different perspective there, and you just have to grab that one opportunity. And I think that it's just recognizing those signs where you can grab those opportunities to bring about peace. And it may not be it may not be entirely apparent, but it's just being open to that fact. And I would probably focus a lot more on the aspect of principles versus interest. And I think that from my guessing is that there was an opportunity to when people sort of understood to move away from their own interests to sort of look at principled action and sort of think, okay, you know, this is the right thing to do, even if it's not necessarily in our interest, but it's the right thing to do. And I think this is where I would love to focus on, because I think that currently now, especially now, we are so driven by our own interests, our own ego, that we fail to often do the right thing because it may not suit our interests. Whether that's speaking out, or do things. And so I think I would love to kind of explore that a lot more, because I think that's important.
Okay. So maybe some, an extra chapter to your book.
Absolutely.
If you talk about, those moments that you take opportunity of, it's maybe also what I often think is about connection, between people, between actions. What I hope that this particular podcast contributes to is helping with those connections. And, one of how I try to weave that also into this podcast is connecting you with the previous guest. And the previous guest is a question for you.
What is the very first courageous action will be this for this year for them in their life for 2026? What will be the very first courageous action in their life?
And you alluded to that in the beginning, so but maybe you can talk a little bit more about it in terms of, that shift to Sri Lanka. Why would you call that a courageous action? And what do you hope that will happen?
So I think it's about stepping. So one is about leave. So I spent 9 years in Geneva, and for those of you who've not been to Geneva, Geneva is a nice, very comfortable. It's almost it's a lovely place to be. It's a vacuum, and I loved the time there. But I also found myself thinking, um, that it was very privileged. Um, and, I had to sort of extricate myself from that kind of thinking, because you can end up just sort of making the moves and being there, and not really recognizing that the rest of the world, other things are happening. And so one is that I wanted to sort of get myself out of there, and have a different challenge that is there. I also wanted my son to understand where he comes from. It's important that he understands where he comes from, because that shapes. All of us are, are stand on the shoulders of giants, right? We all stand on the shoulders of giants, and those giants are our parents, our grandparents, people who have come before us. And you know it's very easy, particularly when you come from the Indian subcontinent or Africa, or wherever, a country that has been colonized. It's very easy to feel a sense of inferiority in terms of who you are. Right? You're not sort of, you underplay that. You underplay that perspective. And I want to be able to give him that opportunity to be proud of where he comes from, proud of what has made, because I am here because, or he is there because of all the people who've come before him and who have contributed to that. And a large portion of that is due to things in Sri Lanka. It's due to the Sri Lankan heritage and everything else. And so I wanted him to be proud of that. Um, Obviously, when you sort of leave your work and you come back and people ask you, oh, so what are you doing now? And you sort of go, I'm taking a sabbatical, or I'm trying to find myself. And in an Asian context, for you to take a sabbatical, or for you to not be working and just be there without anything, it's very strange for people, right? So so I think that's been interesting just to kind of think about, and just to understand where I see myself, and just so I took that perspective, and it was quite a challenge. Obviously, there were other circumstances as well that I had to kind of leave to come here, but part of that was that I wanted to come. I wanted to be able to kind of spend that time there, to be able to just sort of see for myself how I can do things differently, and
Mm.
sort of recalibrate myself a little bit.
Okay. How old is your son?
My son is 11.
Okay. So he's younger than you were when you moved to the boarding school. You were 16.
Yes,
So
yes.
1 month in, right? You're saying 1 month in now. Um, yeah, what is the impression of your son so far from your perspective?
I mean, obviously, he's finding it challenging. I think he's been to Sri Lanka on holidays, so it's not entirely new to him. But I think the holiday honeymoon period has is definitely over, and now he's here, and so it is slightly challenging for him, particularly with his friends, from Geneva, and a certain way he's used to doing things. But I think I mean, these are just things that I think hopefully we'll be able to overcome and come through. So on the other hand, I'm hoping that in years to come that
Mhm.
he will appreciate, looking back, that he got to spend time with his grandparents, and he got to kind of have this, and hoping that this at least will give him a better understanding of who he is, because I know what it's like to be sort of everywhere but nowhere, right?
Mm.
And so at least it helps him to ground in who he is, in his identity,
Mhm.
and I think that's important for me.
Um, okay, I still have a quick question to you for
Sure.
you, and it might be difficult though. Is you know what you? I mean, I think when I listen to you, yeah, on the one hand, you appreciate the fact that you had such a life where you were growing up in different cultures. Um, do you also find it a problem? Is that you don't, your community is everywhere, but maybe nowhere? And that you're
um
searching for that now, going back to Sri Lanka?
Yes, a little bit. I think a little bit there, because obviously, there's no place called home. I mean, it's a bit like you were saying about your kids, right? They sort of say home is where you were, and so I think for a large portion of my time, home was where my parents were. So I think my mom is here, so perhaps this is an element of home is here, but I'm also equally at home in the UK. So I think that there is an element there, and that can be quite unnerving, not to be able to to settle in a place. But I do think that searching. I mean, I've channeled that. Let me put that. I've channeled that searching, that frustration, into actually then social action and doing things and connecting and helping, and then that's where then it's giving me a privilege to kind of go around and live in different places and be comfortable living there. So the last 9 years, Geneva was where I grew up, where I lived, and I kind of absorbed that, and adapted that as home, even though I knew I was never going to settle there. So I mean, I think that's where I would sort of think about, and maybe that's not necessarily the way the world is. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because there's a lot of geographic mobility now, that is there, and so people are moving all over the place, and it just helps me um, understand um, people better. And I think, if I look back on it, yes, it's been unconventional. And for a lot of people, it may not sound ideal. You're moving, you're here, you're neither here, and you're not neither there, you're not. But it's because of those experiences that I am where I am today. And I have that network of people that I can call, and I have that appreciation. I think that's one thing that I found. that I have a better appreciation of different cultures, different traditions, different people than many others, because I have kind of learned to understand. I've also learned the process of what that means, and that's why I guess I went into peace building, and I went in because I was able to kind of empathize, with that, and have that sensitivity.
Okay. Your question for the next guest, Amjad.
So I was thinking about that, right? And so maybe my next question, or for the question for, would be, what does peace look like to you in everyday life?
Okay, I like that. Music is very important to me, so I always have a question about music as well, which most of my guests find the most difficult question. So if I ask you to come up with a song or a piece of music that represents, for a big part, what you are about, Amjad is about, which song or piece of music would that be, and why?
Okay, so I actually was thinking about this, and I actually came up with 4 songs. So I'm not. I always like to kind of buck disrupt everything. So I came up. You asked me number one. I came up with 4. So if it's okay, I'd like to tell you what the 4 is, and then maybe out of that I can give you what I would
I,
consider.
I've never allowed 4. I have allowed 3, but okay.
Okay,
Tell us. Yeah.
so I think the first one for me is um, one by Elvis Presley, and I know I'm dating myself, but it's a song that I love, and it's the one where he performs with the Philharmonic Orchestra. So it's one of his recent albums, and it's called "If I Can Dream." And the backstory of this is, he wrote this the day Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and it was amazing because he was assassinated. Elvis Presley, as far as I remember, sort of retreated into his room that night, and the next morning came out the song. And so I think the concept of dreaming, which again has that aspect of radical hope in that, right?
Mm.
The concept of dream. I then so this is all linked. So I then have linked it to uh, a song by Cat Stevens called Peace Train. And there's a particular rendition of that, which is done by a group called Play for Change, or Playing for Change, or something like that. So if you kind of Google Playing for Change Peace Train, you come up. And what I like about it is that they've taken different artists from different parts of the world, mashed them together, and in the end, Cat Stevens kind of finishes up the song, but it's there. And again, the song Peace Train, it really is about humanity boarding a train moving towards peace, and again, suggesting that peace is not something delivered by leaders alone, right? It is something people must join together to build. So again, it builds on that radical hope, but moves towards collective hope. um the third song would be a song by Coldplay called 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 Everglow. And Everglow was written when Muhammad Ali died. And so if you listen to the song towards the end, they have a quotation from Muhammad Ali, where he talks about giving back to society, and um, being recognized for that. So again, it's sort of, it's that inspiration that we have the agency to do that. Then I'm going to be cheeky and sort of say that there's a there's a song called Gurus of Peace, which is by someone called A.R. Rahman, who's a very notable Bollywood composer, um, and someone called Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who is a Pakistani Sufi master. And this brings together modern orchestral music and sort of a spiritual depth of Sufi Qawwalis. And, it's sort of talking about the role of peace and everything else. And I think what I wanted to kind of talk about there was then just this fact that we have um, the sort of daring to dream, the fact that peace is built with ourselves, that we start with ourselves, and that we blend. We are a blend of different cultures and aspects to, together. And then, if I'm extremely cheeky, I'm going to add one more song. Sorry, uh, Maurice, I have the floor here, so I'm going to add one more song, and that is a traditional Sufi devotional song. Um, called Dam Mast Kalandar, which has been traveled over the centuries and it's performed by different artists. My particular rendition of it is done by a group called the Orchestral Qawwali, which is again very interesting because it's Sufi music is always traditionally Islamic. The Orchestral Qawwali is made up of Muslims, non-Muslims, and so they bring together. But what makes it powerful is that people from different religious traditions across South Asia sing it together to celebrate spiritual love and transcendence. So all of these things put together remind us that the longing for peace is universal and that we all have a role to play in that, whatever small. We don't need to, it's not about changing the world. It's about let's bring peace to our communities. And so hence I brought that. So sorry, I know you asked for one song, but I couldn't help myself.
Thank you so much, Amjad. You're creating enormous problems for me.
I'm sorry,
Because
but then
I
that's
know
I'm
I
all,
know that there will be future guests. When they come up with 5 or 6, they will say yes. But I do know that when Amjad was your guest, you allowed him to share 5 songs. Um, but I will allow it. There is so much intentionality in your explanation. So I will add those 5 songs to a playlist that we have developed. If you go to Spotify, and I will make sure it's also available in other platforms as well. But if you go to Spotify, where #WalkTalkListen, you will find all the songs that have been picked by my guest, and your 5 songs will be added as well, Amjad. These conversations always go fast, and I really enjoy talking with you, and really would like to reiterate that they should check out your latest publication on hope. I think it's very important. Um, I would like to thank you for today, for your willingness to talk with me and share your wisdom, for who you are, everything you do. Yeah. Um, yeah. Was there a question that I did not ask you today that I should have asked you?
um, no, I mean, I think it's probably uh the question that I would have asked, the question I'm asking the next guest is also a question that is I want to ask myself, or people
Uh-huh.
should ask me, right? What does peace look like? And again, for me, again, this aspect of thinking about peace, because we think about peace in terms of treaties and diplomacy and mediation, all of that. But you know, peace is just simply built in classrooms, in neighborhoods, in faith institutions, and families, and in moments where people choose empathy over indifference. Um, I think that uh, you know it's not imposed from above. Peace is a lived experience, which is something we learn, we practice, and we create together. And I think that's what ultimately is what we need to think about in this era of post-normal times, I
Mm,
would say.
yeah. No, I was. I was thinking about asking you that question, but then you came up with your 5 songs. So I
Sorry.
I think you've answered it there. So
Yes.
thank you so much, Amjad, and
Well,
all the
thank you.
best. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.